You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Star Trek Strange New Worlds episode, Lost in Translation. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel is Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Very well. And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to stick around to the end because we have more of your listener feedback that we've received from listeners. That's how listener feedback works, I suppose. And we've got some good stuff to talk about. I also want to encourage you to share the podcast with your friends. I really want to encourage this because that is the number one way that this community of great Star Trek fans grows. We reach more listeners. It's by your efforts. So we really do appreciate when you do that. And finally, I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you are sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. And you can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/secrets. So we're talking about this episode, Lost in Translation. Jimmy, can you give us a recap?
This week's Uhura-centric episode features a visit from Lieutenant James T. Kirk of the USS Farragut. The Enterprise and the Farragut are in a nebula on the border of Gorn space where the Federation has built a deuterium mining station. But the station is offline, and they uncover evidence that it's been sabotaged. Eventually, they learn it was sabotaged by a Lieutenant Saul Ramon, who has been hearing noises and seeing visions. And he's lost his mind due to severe damage to the speech centers of his brain. The same thing starts to happen to Ensign Uhura. She starts hearing noises and seeing visions, including the death of her family and the deceased engineer Hemmer, who appears as a zombie Anar. But she realizes that she's actually receiving impressions from interdimensional aliens who are linked to the deuterium they're mining. The mining efforts are killing them, and they're screaming for help. They burned out Lieutenant Ramon, but Uhura realizes in time that they must shut down the deuterium mining station. Unfortunately, the damage Lieutenant Ramon did to it is preventing them from shutting it down. So they're forced to evacuate the station and blow it up with photon torpedoes because this is Star Trek and we need an explosion at the end. Afterwards, the formerly zombie Hemmer appears to Uhura in a vision as his normal self. He smiles, nods, and disappears, indicating that the situation is now fixed. The end.
All right. Let's go with our overall impressions to begin.
I should say this is Star Trek and we need an explosion at the end, unless you're Voyager, in which case we need to stand around over consoles.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Father Cory, what's your overall impression of this one?
I kind of enjoyed this one. Kirk, the relationship between Kirk and Uhura was interesting. At the bar, and I'm not looking at being hit on today.
Yeah, that was good. That was good.
Was good. It was interesting. The Hemmer zombie was appropriately creepy. And then kind of the realization, slowly of Uhura figuring out what's going. Uhura with the Kirks, both Sam and James, figuring out what was going on was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yet another, life force in a nebula episode. Otherwise, it was interesting. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. How about you, Jimmy?
I enjoyed it. It had a nice horror movie vibe. This is the first time, even though it's the third time we've seen James Kirk in this series, it's the first time it hasn't been in an alternate timeline. Mm-hmm. Because the first time we saw him was in an alternate timeline that Captain Pike was experiencing. The next time it was in an alternate timeline that La'an was experiencing. And so this is the first time he's really been here. Mm-hmm. And it ties in to an episode to when they introduced him in the Menagerie Part 1. Commodore Mendez asked Kirk, "Have you ever met Chris Pike?" And Kirk responded, "When he was promoted to fleet captain." And in this episode, Pike is temporarily promoted to fleet captain. So this is the event that they were talking about. Like I said, it had a nice horror movie vibe. It also is nice seeing continuing fallout from the death of Hemmer, not only for Uhura, who was attached to him, but also for number one, because Hemmer's death complicates number one's perception of Pelia, who replaced him.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was some interesting psychological stuff, and there was effectively creepy horror stuff, when Uhura is seeing visions and hearing noises and stuff like that. And I thought it was a nice episode.
So I like it. It was good. I like a Uhura episode. I think she does a good job. And all of those things you guys said. I want to add something about Paul Wesley being Kirk, which is that I feel like every time I see him show up as Kirk, it's more
better.
Yeah, he's more and more like the Kirk I expect. He is more and more James T. Kirk.
He's growing into the character.
Yes.
The actor is growing into the character so much more, and we're seeing more of the personality of Kirk come out.
Yeah. I think he's better written than he was in his first appearance as well. In his most recent 2 appearances, I think the writing was better for Kirk. I was not a huge fan of his first appearance. It's like, I'm not sure this guy is right for this part.
Yeah.
But he's growing on me.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see, it's sort of a bit of the Chris Pine Kirk from the Kelvin timeline, bit of the Chris Pine.
The what?
Yes. Okay. And from the timeline we shall not speak of until we have to do those movies, and the Shatner Kirk. And it's just nice to see that kind of grow, and and also a bit of Paul Wesley's interpretation of the character. And so it's nice to see that. I enjoy that. There's speculation, and I just want to kind of get you guys' sense of not whether it will happen, but what you would think of it, of a TOS reboot series following Strange New Worlds. What do you think?
I think they could do a prequel series patterned off the original series where we have Pike retire from the Enterprise. He hands over command to Kirk, and we get the unseen adventures of Kirk and the original crew, because they apparently had adventures before where no man has gone before. And we could explore that era. That could make sense.
We get Gary Mitchell, and we could have those characters aboard. Yeah, that would be interesting to see. I
don't know. I guess I'm getting a little too. It's one thing to have prequels like Enterprise was, like this is. It's another thing when you're butting right up to that line, where that the last episode of that TOS prequel will lead right into TOS itself.
Right. So that it sucks some of the drama out when you know that certain characters have to live and that sort of thing, I guess.
People say this every time we talk about prequels, but I call nonsense on that. Because let me make my point. Because we always know certain characters are going to live. They are not going to kill Captain Pike, in this series. So Captain Pike has to live. We know they're not going to kill Uhura. It doesn't suck. When we're watching the original series, they weren't going to kill Uhura. They weren't going to kill Captain Kirk. Not everybody's life has to be on the line to tell a good story. And particularly if it's a picaresque format where every episode is episodic and you don't have an ongoing, say, story of a war you're telling, then prequels can be just fine. The problem with Enterprise was not that it was a prequel. It was a badly done prequel because they didn't realize what needed to happen in it.
For me, it's not so much these characters aren't going to die. There's a certain suspension of disbelief that you have to have, especially when you're talking about the technology changes between 1960 and today. And, you can argue, okay, yes, the Enterprise doesn't look like it did in TOS. And that is an issue of what they thought high tech looked like in 1967 is very different than what we think high tech looks like today. But then when you're going up to that actual moment where you finish watching one episode that was filmed in 2025, and then the next episode is 1967, for many of us, for myself at least, it would break that point of, okay, this is clear, this is supposed to be the same exact ship with the same exact crew, and it's just completely different.
I suppose. I don't know that would bother me at this point.
It wouldn't.
Just-
It wouldn't bother me. It would only be a momentary. My thought is, for me, it would be only a momentary bump if I chose to watch TOS immediately after the last episode of a James T. Kirk Enterprise prequel. And I wouldn't have any more trouble accepting it than I did the change in the Klingon makeup, for which they eventually explained, but I didn't need the explanation. This is just better.
Leave well enough alone. Leave
For
well
me,
enough alone with TOS.
Yeah.
It's in the can. Leave it alone. Let's do other
So
things.
we made our points.
Yeah.
We've all expressed our views.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get my point, which was
Okay.
I would just like to say I'm kind of done with prequels. Let's move on to the future. Let's do Star Trek with Seven as Captain, whatever. I forget what they were going to call that. Titan, Liberty,
Legacy.
whatever. Legacy. Let's do that. So moving on to this episode. It's interesting. I think there's been a pattern of every episode starting with a different person giving a personal log. I think that's been the
Yeah,
case.
it's not always Pike doing the captain's log.
Log. Yeah. I have to say, from the beginning, as soon as the phenomena started, I'm like, oh, it's another aliens living in a gas cloud again, which we just did in Picard season 3. I thought that was an odd choice to do that again, but
At least it did start out when they're going into the nebula saying there's coffee in that nebula. So I mean, we're okay there.
right.
I don't mind aliens in nebulas. Aliens have to live somewhere, and if it's not on a planet or a moon, it's going to be in a nebula.
Yeah, that's true. So we do get a bit of the larger picture. We get, like you mentioned, Pike is fleet captain for this particular operation. The Farragut is with them because we know Kirk has been promoted to first officer. Farragut, youngest first officer ever, and all that.
Although he's not technically first officer yet.
Right. And presumably will be promoted from lieutenant, at least.
Oh yeah,
Lieutenant commander or commander. Yeah.
Yeah. And the refinery is being built on the edge of Gorn space, which is a strategic strong point. For a little while, I was toying with the idea that maybe it was Gorn sabotage. They're going to play some political intrigue. So I enjoyed Uhura is trying to figure out what's making the sound that only she heard. And she thinks it might have been in the communications array. So she goes and follows the YouTube DIY video that Hemmer made for her, which I just thought was a nice little touch because it felt a lot like, okay, you follow along, how do I replace this thing on my car? I'll follow the YouTube video.
I did that with a chair just yesterday.
Exactly. Yeah. We all do that.
It was nice having the actor playing Hemmer back. Because he's not just in archive footage in this. He is playing the zombie. I'm pretty sure he is playing himself at the end, or the image of him at the end. He is also, I believe, doing the YouTube video new. I don't think that's archival footage.
Right.
So they actually brought him back and paid him a salary, and that was nice. It took me the longest time to remember what the noise that Uhura hears sounds like, because it's this very harsh, vibrating, discordant noise. And it finally occurred to me, it's the Breen noise from from Deep Space Nine. Whenever the Breen speak, they don't have universal translators, and so you hear this jarring noise, and it's that this noise sounds like.
That is true.
Like a distorted whisper, kind of what. You can't make out what's being whispered, but you can tell that it's like a voice whispering something.
Yeah, very distorted voice. I wonder if that's intentional. Are we meeting some connection to the Breen? Yeah.
We should talk about what deuterium is, though.
Okay.
So deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. Normal hydrogen has 1 proton, and deuterium has 1 proton and 2 neutrons. So it's heavier. There's also another one called tritium, but we won't go into that. Deuterium is actually useful, despite how low it is on the periodic table. It has properties that would make it very useful in producing nuclear fusion. It would do better than regular hydrogen. And so if they're still using nuclear fusion, which I guess they are, it would make sense for them, in addition to matter-antimatter reactions, it could make sense for them to want to collect deuterium. What did not make sense was they initially, when Uhura starts hearing the noise and seeing the visions, Dr. Mbenga tells her that she may be experiencing deuterium poisoning because she was exposed to a very small amount of deuterium. And it's like, okay, no. Because deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, your body's going to treat it like hydrogen. Anything that has the same number of electrons on its outer shell and is going to get treated the same by your body. That's why radium is so bad for humans to consume. Now, early in the 20th century, there was a product called Radiathor, which was marketed as a health drink. Because radium releases energy, and so it must give you more energy. So we'll bottle it and sell it to people, and you can drink radium, and it will improve your energy level. And there was this millionaire who had no money worries, and so he bought cases of Radiathor and drank it every day until his jaw fell off. Because what happens is radium it has the same number of electrons on its outer shell as calcium. And so your body looks at radium and says, oh, that's calcium. We can use that to build bones. And the bones that are under the most stress in our bodies are our jaws, because we're constantly chewing. They get microfractures. Our body uses calcium to repair them. But if you drink Radiathor, it will use radium to repair them, and you will have a permanently radioactive jaw that will eventually drop off. So deuterium is going to be treated by your body as if it's hydrogen. And it is possible to get deuterium poisoning, but not at these levels. Yeah. You could survive having 20 to 25% of your body water replaced by heavy water with deuterium. And that's like, so you would have to drink, we have gallons of water in our bodies. You would have to drink gallons of heavy water to get deuterium poisoning.
Yeah.
And at least enough to kill you. And you could easily take a sip, which would be more deuterium than Uhura was exposed to, and you would be fine.
Right. And probably wouldn't be hallucinations or that sort.
No.
That's one of the things that bugs me with stories like this. I mean, it's a minor complaint, but how the doctors often dismiss the complaints. Like, you see weird stuff all the time. Don't dismiss these complaints offhand as exhaustion and whatever. Like, explore them. But of course, it's for the story purposes, and we have to have a story. So
I don't mind that. I mean, for every Uhura that has something serious happening, there are probably a dozen Barclays coming into sick bay.
Guys trying to get out of work. Yeah, that's probably
because you've got people, or not trying to get out of work, just people we go into weird situations, and so. It's like if you have a poltergeist in your house, you're going to start thinking everything that goes weird is caused by the poltergeist. So if you're exploring weird stuff every week, you're going to have everyone thinking, my minor symptom is caused by aliens invading. And you need Dr. Mbenga as a paranormal investigator to calm them down and say, let's look at a natural explanation for this.
I was going to say, or you could talk about another spirit, because they do have like actual alcohol on the ship in the bar, and maybe someone goes and has a little too much. And the reason why you're hallucinating isn't because of an alien, it's because you're fall down drunk. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I guess this is a Boimler in Lower Decks ends up going to sick bay a lot for those sorts of things. So when Uhura is working on the communication system, realigning it or whatever, Pelia shows up, who's messing with my warp engines because it's in the nacelle. And Uhura reveals, well, actually Pelia reveals that Hemmer was what she says was one of my best students. Really? No, I just say that because he's dead. Yeah, that's the sort of thing you say when someone has died.
He was average.
It was a nice change of face to have that a little honesty. And the question is has Uhura been avoiding Pelia? And that comes up again with number one, Una. Are they avoiding Pelia because she's replaced a beloved friend and crewmate who they lost? And that seems like a natural thing to happen. So then we get the zombie Hemmer encounter in the turbolift, which was frightening. Nice horror moment. And the Pelia knows that something is more is wrong with the refinery. She's got this sense that because she goes over there, Una is over there. They're looking for what's the problem is. They have to get this refinery online, and I get this feeling. There's more to what's going on. It just doesn't smell right. And Una dismisses her. I don't base my decisions on feelings and smells. She's very, Vulcan in that sense. The ignoring that, but there just seems to be this sense of people underestimating Pelia because she seems kind of frivolous.
Space hippie.
She calls her a space hippie.
Called a space hippie.
Yes, but she's also got experience of thousands of years of life of various kinds. So ignore that at your peril.
It's interesting. Pelia does kind of come off as a space hippie, although she says that's a new one on me.
Yeah.
But number one and Pelia both have points. Pelia's point is number one has some kind of beef with her that she's not facing or not willing to talk about. And but number one has points too. She at one point, she tells Pelia that she thinks she's sloppy and disobeys orders, and she has a really cutting remark in watching The Good Place. They have characters who are playing demons on that show, and one of the things, and it's comedy, and one of the things that struck me about the insults the demons use is how banal they are. It's like, you're a silly poopy head kind of thing. It's like, that's not going to hurt anybody. Really crushing insults would be things like going to a boss and say, your subordinates don't think as highly of you as they think you do, and they only tolerate your opinions because you're in a superior position. I mean, that would really rattle a boss. Well, number one gives Una a crushing insult at one point. She says, "You've been in Starfleet since before I was born, but I outrank you. Why do you think that is?" Like, oh, wow, burn.
That is a burn. So
I did like the discussion though, where Una's dressing Pelia down, and you've got crumbs on your uniform. Where did you even find food?
Right. Yeah. Why are you so sloppy? So then we have, as you mentioned, Jim Kirk showing up to visit with his brother Sam.
And
so
boy,
nice moment.
Do they have sibling rivalry going.
Oh, yeah. Kirk has been promoted, as I mentioned, to first officer, youngest first ever in Starfleet. And Sam resents Jim, his younger brother, because he's making him look bad in front of their dad. You're going all these places and I'm just, in a science lab. And Jim kind of gives it to him like, yeah, maybe you should get out of the science lab and do something. It's up to you. It's an interesting conundrum, because if you have a younger sibling or a sibling at all who just is so much better at everything than you are, it can feel a little left out.
And they mentioned that the previous holder of the record for the youngest first officer was George Kirk Sr. In other words, their dad. And so that's part of where this issue is coming in, where Sam doesn't feel like he's appreciated by the family as much as the shining star Jim is.
They really need to bring George Kirk Sr. in and have it be played by Chris Hemsworth, like from those movies we don't talk about.
Yeah, good luck with that. You're not going to spend that kind of money.
No. So,
and it may play into part of why Sam eventually leaves Starfleet and becomes a colonist.
That's right. Right. Yeah. I mean, he becomes that and dies.
Then gets killed by a space parasite, a flying omelet. Hermit crab stinger thing.
You'd think, well, yeah. I mean, there's a bit of a continuity problem because Spock would have recognized Sam, obviously, in that episode if this sort of information, if they had served on the Enterprise already. But
I don't know that there's an inconsistency there. I'd have to rewatch, check the original episode. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we have Spock and Christine Chapel talking about their relationship that has started and discussing whether to report their fraternization, as it develops into a relationship. And I'm thinking if their regulations are anything like today's military, that's already past that line. They need to report what's happened already.
Well, but she's a civilian contractor, basically. She's not military. That's one thing they said in the beginning of Strange New Worlds is she's like I said, basically a contractor.
That could explain why she's always in the white uniform rather than in a blue one like in Benga.
Yep. Exactly.
Right.
Even though she does have stripes on the edge of her sleeve, that might not be a rank stripe.
That might be civilian equivalent. Yeah.
Right. In fact, someone pointed out that there's another female medical personnel wearing white in the background, blonde with the similar haircut to Dr. I'm trying to remember it as I was just before I was going to say it, but the female psychologist from the second pilot, where No Man Has Gone Before, who ends up dying with Daner. Right. They're wondering, is this background character going to be setting the stage for introducing Elizabeth Daner? So that would be interesting to see. Any case, their relationship stuff is still part of this developing in the background here of this episode. So you talk about the scene where Uhura meets. Go ahead.
I should mention, because we alluded to civilian ranks, and they do, for purposes of facilitating interactions between civilian contractors and military personnel, have rank equivalents for civilians. So you're not a captain, let's say, but they give you a designation that in the pay scale and in the authority level kind of you can say, okay, this person's a civilian, but if they were in the military, they'd be a captain. And
in certain circumstances,
right? That's my point. And so it facilitates the interaction between military personnel and civilians when they're in these formal settings.
And I would say, like I say, certain circumstances, because I worked with contractors all the time when I was in the Air Force, and we really never, they would have been probably, airman equivalent or whatever, but that was never a consideration. The big time you'll actually see that is when you have distinguished visitors coming on base, VIPs, like say the Archbishop of Military Service, Archbishop Brolio, is 2-star general equivalent. So he is treated like when he comes on base, he is treated as if a 2-star general just came on base, including for housing. Heard a story from a chaplain that was at Malmstrom Air Force Base outside of Great Falls here. And Archbishop was just going to stay at his housing on base. And I guess the military PR, public affairs, threw a fit that they'd even think about that, because this was a 2-star general, was just going to go be in regular officers' housing. We can't have that. He's got to have the nice suite at billeting and all that.
That's funny.
Yeah. You can also imagine how it could be important for a nurse to have this kind of rank, because she's going to need to order people to take their meds or take tests or things like that.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about the meeting of Uhura and Kirk, and this is nice because this is a relationship that will go on, as we've seen for many decades, and there's always seemed to be a bond between Kirk and Uhura. Not the same friendship that he has, say, with Spock and McCoy, but there's a kind of mutual admiration and leader follower respect. Yep. And it's nice to see the beginning here. And as you mentioned, Father Cory, she does the I'm not interested in being hit on. And he's like, you sat next to me, I'm not hitting on you. I thought that was good. And but then she slugs him in the middle of a hallucination. And then has to he takes it pretty well given what's going on and tries to help her, and it creates this ability for him to become part of the story and aid her in getting to the root of what's going on. So I like that. So Uhura has
I do love the line where she hits him and he's laying on the ground like, I really am not trying to hit on you.
Yeah. There are several more hallucinations. There's one on the refinery. Uhura has one on the bridge. So things are clearly getting worse. And then at one point I was thinking, this feels like Inception a little bit, like when they're looking for Mendez on the ship, going through the corridors, because I felt like
Ramon.
Ramon, and it felt like what's real and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Is Uhura really experiencing these events, or is this just her imagination? So there was a bit of question there, although it turned out that it was they made it clear which was, after that point, which was real and which wasn't.
It also was like Alien.
Yes,
hunting through the corridors.
I did think to myself at the time, though, if she's having hallucinations where she's lashing out at people, maybe don't give her a phaser.
Yeah, they do have a bit where, Kirk is like, okay, you're hallucinating. I'm going to walk you to sickbay. And she's like, no, I'll go. You need to help find Ramon. And there's another point where he tells her to wait for me. And she doesn't wait. She just goes off. So there's a bit of sloppiness about that, but you can attribute it to the fact that she's hallucinating. But they should have had someone come and walk her to sickbay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and then she calls in as she's supposed to be going to sickbay, calls in, oh, I found where he went. He went up to the port nacelle. And of course, they immediately respond, okay, we're going to be there, instead of saying, now, are you really sure that you saw this blood trail leading up? Or,
well, and as usual, stay where you are, wait for us to come. Sure. And then she just goes.
Immediately goes up the Jeffries tube.
Yeah.
There's also a nice scene where after some of this has been happening, and Ramon ends up getting blown out into space, and Kirk and Uhura are saved by an emergency beam out once they're exposed to the vacuum of space. But then after that, there's a scene where Uhura is talking about her problems with death and facing it, because she had her brother and her parents die in a shuttle crash. She had Hemmer, who was kind of a mentor to her, died last season. And she is traumatized by that. She says, after her parents and brother died, she'd just close her eyes and see them and their deaths and how horrible they were. She wasn't a witness of them, but she'd imagine it. And she's not sure how she can function as a Starfleet officer, having this kind of problem dealing with death. And Kirk tells her, maybe you can't. Maybe you can't serve as a Starfleet officer if you can't face death. And he says you can either let death win or you can fight back. But he says, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. You may not be able to function as an officer if you can't deal with this. And he encourages her to deal with it, which she then does.
Right. I thought that was a really good scene. I liked the fact that he does, like you said, he doesn't sugarcoat it, that he makes her confront this and say, you can't just wish it away. It's something you have to deal with. And if you can't deal with it, maybe you're done. I did like that. So we do get on encountering Kirk for the first time, the Kirk of this timeline universe. And she has an appropriate reaction given her experiences. And he's kind of, I don't know if he notices her reaction. I'm trying to remember now, but whether it's odd.
He notices that she's reacting in some way to him. And he tells her as she's walking off, I haven't forgotten about that drink, because she had called him up on an iPad, an episode or so ago. And he said, next time, we're at the same starbase or whatever, we can have a drink.
Right. So I did think it odd when Uhura goes to the nacelle to confront Ramon. This was a note I skipped. Is she doesn't just stun him; she tries to talk him down. I don't know if it's odd or not, but I think she's trying to get through to him. But like my first reaction would be, okay, he seems like irrational and he's doing something dangerous. I have this weapon that allows me to incapacitate someone. I might do that.
Just stun him. That's all you got to do. You don't got to kill him.
Exactly.
I wonder if part of it was a hope on her part, because she'd mentioned that, okay, I've got about a day and a half till I lose my mind. Hope that if she can talk him down, that if she gets to that point, she won't be completely irrational. Well.
Although, and I think she was in the scene to hear this, but Dr. Mbenga indicated that he's got a lot of damage to the. I know she did. He's got a lot of damage to the language center in his brain, and she's got a lot of activity in her language center, and so that's fine. Except there isn't actually a language center in the brain. There are 4. So which one is it?
Right. In that conversation Kirk has with Uhura, he does mention his dad. It's something that came up in Tomorrow, which was this whole question is why does he care about strangers more than he does about me? Because he's gone in Starfleet all the time, and in this one, this Kirk has resolved it by saying, I want to care about strangers like he does. I want to, find that for myself, which is interesting. And another point is, I was thinking when Kirk meets La'an later on, when Kirk meets Khan in Space Seed, it's kind of funny. He doesn't say, hey, you know what? I met your great granddaughter. I know, but it just something occurred to me. So we have Una and Pelia having their confrontation, and this whole thing about whether it's Pelia is a space hippie, whether Una's just doesn't like not being the smartest one in the room, and then it comes down to her feelings about Hemmer. So that was an interesting aspect of that one. In conjunction with number one's statement to Pelia that she's sloppy, she doesn't just mean work-wise. I mean, she mentions you've got crumbs on your uniform, which I actually couldn't see. Maybe if you were watching this on a giant high-def TV, you could. But what I did notice is after she comes back from working on stuff, she's got like a stain on her face. It's like she got her hand on some dirt or something and wiped her face, and now she's got this stain on her face. Space grease.
Yeah, space grease. So there is that. They do visually support the sloppiness charge in a literal sense.
Mm-hmm. So Uhura finally figures out it's a communication. That's what's going on. It's an extremely alien communication. They're trying to communicate to her through the vocabulary of these visions. The visions themselves are a kind of vocabulary,
which are based on Uhura's memories. And when she twigs to this and realizes they're using her as an interdimensional universal translator, she's able to walk back through each of the visions she had and interpret it as a meaningful message. And I thought that was very nicely done.
Yeah. I really like when they try to get like very interesting alien concepts like this. How would, because not every alien can be a human being with bumps on their heads who speaks English through a universal translator. I like when they try to go alien with this stuff and come up with a novel or interesting concept for this. So that was really good. So, just trying to think of what else. Pelia gave Una a C at the Academy, so that was nice. A little bit of data, and then we finally end up the episode with Spock and Kirk meeting for the first time, which was a really nice touch. I like the idea of seeing this first meeting between these two towering figures within Star Trek. So I thought that was really nice. So, anything else, Father Cory? Any other notes from you?
So the nebula was named Bannon's Nebula. And this was actually named by the producers for Brian Bannon, who was Melissa Navia's partner, Ortegas.
Yeah.
And he died about 4 years ago, suddenly, basically from leukemia. Like, I guess, according to the article, it was diagnosed and 4 days later he died. And so this was kind of a nod to him. And there's an article online on Screen Rant, I think it is, that, you can, that talks about, how she saw it as an honor to him, and was honored that they were willing to do that. So that's kind of a neat little nod there, because as far as I know, there's no actual Bannon's Nebula, but this was again a nod to him. I was a little irritated though, because they kept using an anachronism that we know, at least I know, I'm pretty sure they would not use. They would not call it a gas station. They kept calling it a gas station.
That's right.
By that time, gasoline is probably well since out of use. Admittedly, Pike has got a little bit of attachment to the past.
And deuterium is a gas.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah. They would probably call it a fuel station or something like that.
Yeah.
But they were using it in the sense of a gasoline station.
Yeah, I think it's one of those
right. It
nods.
is a gas, but that is an anachronism, at least in my opinion. So.
And there are lots of things that get started and stick in language long beyond anyone remembers their origin. The greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, we say that all the time, or periodically we say it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And no one knows the origin of that, which is that, sliced bread was actually introduced in 1927. Before that, you had to cut it yourself. So it was a great thing when it got introduced. Similarly, if someone, adopts a position, lock, stock, and barrel,
mm-hmm.
people don't know that the stock and the barrel and the lock are the parts of a gun.
Yep.
So you're saying you've accepted it just like you accepted all three parts of a gun, the lock being the mechanism that fires the bullet. So we have lots of things like that just stick in our language and remain for long periods of time, even when no one remembers where they came from.
Like the whole 9 yards is another one I like to remember. That's another one that has a very anachronistic origin.
And if you get the whole 9 yards out of fabric, you could be dressed to the nines.
That's right. Anything else, Father Cory?
Nope, that's it.
Jimmy, any other notes?
I like that when Uhura proposes destroying the station because they can't shut it down, Pike looks at her, and I was wondering if they were going to address this, but Pike looks at her because she's just come in with this theory about aliens, and we haven't run any tests, but we've got to do this really fast because of how bad things are. He actually does say, "How certain are you?"
Yep.
And so, okay, good. We at least got an important safety check there because she has been hallucinating.
Yeah.
And I can imagine him saying, "No, we're not going to destroy it," but at least they had a nod in that direction. Also, there's a nice scene where Chapel and Spock are playing chess, and they are, which is kind of a surrogate for their relationship. And Spock says, "Your move" to her, and she realizes that saying "your move" is a surrogate for saying "hurry up." and they both end up saying "your move" to each other several times in that scene.
Yeah.
And which was nice. Also, in the scene where George where Sam and Jim Kirk and Uhura are piecing things together, it's in like a bio lab, and it looks like Sam has a little baby Gorn skull on his desk.
Probably salvaged from the last season of those encounters.
Or at least it's a replica.
Yeah. 3D printed. You know, they got good 3D replicators. Very good. All right, so that is Lost in Translation. I did promise some feedback, and we have some here from Richard, who sent in an email. He says, "I bought the first season of Strange New Worlds from iTunes based on your discussions. 2 thoughts. Maybe we should stay out of space, away from other species, new exotic illnesses that we never have with no cure." And then he asks, "Would Hemmer's death be suicide, a mortal sin? It was clear he was killing himself by the fall and not just leaving the ship. Does committing suicide to save others make it acceptable? Thanks for the great show."
Killing yourself to save others does not make suicide acceptable. However, just because you take an action that is foreseen to lead to your own death does not make it suicide. For example, this question came up after the 9/11 attacks back in 2001, because there were people on the top of the Trade Center who jumped rather than face the flames. And the question was, is that suicide? Well, I can't speak to an individual's heart, but in principle, it's not. Because if you're jumping to escape being burned alive, you're not trying to kill yourself. You're trying to escape the flames. You just foresee that doing it is going to lead to your death. In the same way, if you could survive the fall, you would welcome that. You're not trying to bring about your death. You're just doing something you foresee is very likely to lead to your death for a proportionate cause, namely to avoid being burned alive. Similarly, in World War I, the classic example is you're in a foxhole, someone tosses in a grenade, somebody jumps on it to save their buddies. what you're trying to do there is not kill yourself. If you can absorb the force of the grenade and still survive, that would be great. Very unlikely to happen, but your intent is not to kill yourself. Your intent is to save your buddies. And so if Hemmer is leaping off of the ship in order to prevent his body from releasing stuff that's going to harm other people, then that would be his intent. He wouldn't be intending to kill himself. He would be intending to protect others from Gorn biological material he might release.
Very good. Very good. Also, if we stayed out of space, then we wouldn't have any cool science fiction series. So there's that. but I'm glad you enjoyed Strange New World Season 1 and our show. So we appreciate it. Excellent. So we'd like to, at this point, take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Anna F., Stephen G., Jason K., Ruth K., and Joseph F. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us this time. What did you think of this episode, Lost in Translation, and our discussion of it? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can watch us on the Secrets of Star Trek on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. So I just want to give a program note. Is if you're listening to this as we release them, you will notice that we had an episode on the episode Charades come out, and then right away we had another episode on this episode come out. Well, they've released the next episode, Those Old Scientists, early. The folks at Paramount have. And then there's going to be another episode right after that. So we're going to be doing this again next week, where we'll have 2 episodes of Secrets of Star Trek released in close proximity. I'm not sure exactly how close, but I'll make it as close as I can. So next time we'll be discussing Those Old Scientists, the Lower Decks crossover. So looking forward to that. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, and to quote the wormhole aliens, or the deuterium aliens,
Dude, did you just swear at me and Breen? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, you can let death win, or you can fight back by holding on to the ones you love.